Hello and welcome to this episode of Bush Footy Legends. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that this podcast is being recorded on the traditional lands of the Noongar people and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. The show is produced by Magic Studios and presented by the WA Country Football League in partnership with Healthway, promoting the Think Mental Health message. On the final episode of Bush Footy Legends for this season, our guest is Brett Peake, the son of a WA football great. His father, Brian, played more than 400 games between East Fremantle, Geelong and a brief stint at Perth. Brett's own career took him to Fremantle, the club's only ever father-son selection, and then to St Kilda, where under Ross Lyon he went as close as you can possibly come to the ultimate football success. But his first taste of a flag had to wait until he started forging a career in the country, and now he's shaping the fortunes of a club in the Great Southern, which had won just 2 games in more than a decade before he arrived. I'm your host, Jackson Barrett. Let's get into it. Brett Peake, thank you very much for joining us on Bush Footy Legends. It's a pleasure to have you on. How are things and where do we find you?
Well, thanks for the shout out and for having me on. Currently in between planting 1,000 seedlings. So I've come up to do this little podcast, and we're sort of east of Albany in a nice part of the world down here. So very fortunate.
Beautiful. And having a kick down there as well. So the Albany Sharks, you're fresh off a grand final defeat, but ready for another run and another crack at it.
Yeah, this year was this was my second year with Albany Sharks, and last year we sort of managed to win a few games and make the finals. So obviously to build on that this year to make the grand final, and look, it was a fantastic game to be a part of, but from a spectacle as well, it was a good grand final from all reports. And yeah, we just weren't good enough to get over the line. So it's always disappointing, losing the biggest game of the year. But hopefully the younger guys and some of the older guys sort of it hurts, and we come back next year and do it all again and have another crack and hopefully go one step better.
We'll speak about a little bit more about your country ties shortly, but how does football start for you? I think you're probably the only guest that we've had where your father and your grandfather played at the top level as well, so you probably had a slightly different relationship with football growing up. What was it like having a dad that played at such a high level, and what was that like as a kid and growing up around football?
Yeah, obviously I was born into football, so ever since I can remember, there was always a footy around. We were always at games on the weekend watching Dad. I still have sort of vivid memories early days down at Shark Park. Me and Dad went down there a couple of weeks ago. Obviously Shark Park's getting knocked down and a new stadium built, so we went down there and sort of brought back a few memories from when I remember sort of in the late 80s. What am I? I was born in 83, so sort of, the 87, 88, being 5 years old. I still remember them. And then obviously coming up through the juniors, obviously grew up in Willetton, so played all my junior footy with Willetton Blues, and it just sort of progressed from there. Just enjoyed it, as you do. Every young kid aspires to play at the highest level. But, for me, I was very small as a young tacker, and at some period, I don't think playing AFL or even playing waffle footy was really on my radar. I wasn't good enough, and that sat well with me. But the old man always from a young age said that I was always going to have a lot of pressure, being the son of Brian, and I was aware of that, and I couldn't have had a better upbringing in regards to the positive and the negative stuff that comes with being the son of a champion, but at the end of the day, I sort of took everything in my own stride and enjoyed the journey.
Were you able to sort of wrap your head around as a youngster what your old man had achieved, or is he sort of just dad through those years, or were you able to put into context quite how good he was and what him playing footy meant to other people as well, I guess?
Yeah, it's sort of a funny one. Sort of back when I was growing up, we didn't have mobile phones. I only have to look at my nephews and sort of, the younger generation now, they can just pick up their phone and Google something and bang, it's straight up there. So from a statistics point of view, information point of view, it's really readily available. Back when I was growing up, really you only had sort of watching the footy, or on a Sunday afternoon. I think it was, I can't even remember what it was called. I think it was Winners back in the day, but they were the only things that we could watch and understand about football, whereas, the new generation just have it very easy. And it's a lot more criticised now. There's a lot of people that, the old armchair experts, I suppose, that, in my point of view, some of them absolutely have no idea whatsoever. But for me, living and breathing it and understanding, the pros and cons that come with it, I suppose at the end of the day, it sort of is what it is. But yeah, I didn't really understand, I suppose, what Dad had achieved until probably later, probably once I started playing AFL and I started to speak to people, some of my coaches that have played with him, against him, and sort of as my AFL career went on, I sort of realised, some of the stuff that he was capable of doing. And I only watched this 79 grand final and one of the State of Origins in the last year or two, and didn't realise sort of the player that he was. So obviously got the utmost respect for him as a person, and the way that he went about his football, because he's certainly he's not the biggest in regards to height, but he was obviously built quite strong.
You sort of touched on the pressure there. Did that come to fruition? Did you feel any of that sort of kicking around at school or around at Willetton at all? Did you sort of have a different relationship with guys at all, or did you just settle in?
No, not really. Once again, obviously, Dad had sort of set everything in place. So it was just water off a duck's back, At the end of the day, a lot of the comments were, you're never going to be as good as your old man. And, at the end of the day, yeah, it's black and white. I certainly wasn't. I certainly achieved nowhere near what he achieved, but there's things in football that I've achieved that he didn't. But overall, I acknowledge that he was one of the greats, and that doesn't mean I put him on a pedestal, and I don't expect anyone else to put him on a pedestal. He was just good at AFL footy, and it was just, once again, I just went with the ebbs and flows of, there are only words that people can sort of sling at you. I suppose the keyboard warriors now, as the younger generation find out. At the end of the day, the best way to discuss anything is a good old debate. And the best debates are, face to face. And, you can sort of go through, especially in the footy circles, because footy is watched by a lot of people and everyone loves having their 2 cents worth. But when you sit down and get to discuss and have a good debate about, this or that, the way the game's going, who's better, who's this, it's quite fun. It's quite enjoyable.
What did playing for East Fremantle mean, given all you touched on about the memories at Shark Park as a youngster? What did playing for the Sharks mean when that opportunity came about, and how did it come about? You're obviously at Willetton. When did that next step come?
I suppose it really sort of didn't sink in until 2 weeks ago when I actually went to East Fremantle, and sort of, just looked around and knowing that the stadium and all the history is going to go. I suppose it's not going to go. It's still going to be there, but it is an end of a massive era. East Fremantle Footy Club is sort of one of the biggest clubs in Australia, and they've produced a lot of good footy players. But for me, it all started back when I was playing amateur footy with the Willow Blues, and got invited down to East Fremantle to train with the sort of league and resis, and sort of was still small at that stage, sort of 18 years of age, didn't play any Colts footy, wasn't good enough to play, and sort of was naturally fit. So sort of went through the pre-season and sort of did a pretty good job, and then went away for Christmas and went surfing, and accidentally forgot to go back to pre-season in early January, and the old man rang up and said, look, if you don't want to play footy, by all means, it doesn't bother me, but just don't let the coach and your teammates hanging. So I sort of, I think I missed the first week, back in, I think it was 2003. And then I went back and sort of head down, bum up, and sort of, then gave it a shot, and was lucky enough to play every league game that year in an aging Sharks team. And at the end of the year was was fortunate enough to get picked up as a father-son to Fremantle.
So was that a size thing, not being looked at as a Colts player, do you think? Were you still just too small? Were you happy just sort of kicking around at Willow? Because it's unusual, particularly these days, not to have played any Colts footy. What was that like?
Well, it's one of those things to look back on it now. At the end of the day, if you're not good enough for something, it should be at peace with it. And I sort of probably look back and just in the games that I played to try to get into the Colts squad, I didn't play good enough. You can use a whole lot of things. Did you play out of position or anything? But I was small. I didn't really have sort of any tricks back then, and that sat well with me. I was happy to play Willow Blues, and it was just around the corner from home. I had some good mates there. There were some good footy players running around, and I would have been happy to continue on my plumbing journey and to play footy with the Willow Blues for forever and a day. But things happen, and I was fortunate enough to go to the next level and to play footy at the highest level.
Was there a moment where that clicked? You mentioned that sort of pre-season where surfing trip took precedence. Do you remember a moment where it clicked and maybe elite footy did sort of grab you and the prospect of, this might happen? You must have known that down the track you may be eligible for a father-son at Fremantle. What sort of point did that start becoming a factor for you?
Yeah, I do remember, and I was playing on a wing for East Fremantle, and playing on the wing's a hard position, especially when the team's not switching and your running patterns are wrong. And I clearly remember it. I think it was 5 rounds into the season. We were playing Subiaco, and the coach said, "Look, we're gonna put you and tag you on little Alistair Smith, Ali Pickett, sorry." And I ended up tagging him, and he was an absolute gun footy player. Just his endurance, and he always was just around the ball. So he led me to the ball pretty much. And I just remember that I sort of kept him quiet for the game, which, being a tagger is your job. But what he taught me sort of some running patterns from a midfield high half forward position that I sort of didn't realise. And yeah, if it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for running around against him, I probably would have been dropped and then played resis, and who knows where the journey would have gone on. So at the end of the day, I suppose I owe it a little bit to him, because he was the one that sort of ignited, a little bit more to play, and I didn't want to get dropped. And I learned a lot from that one game tagging, and I've seen it in football even at the highest level. If you're out of form, sometimes they get a good player to run with another player, and good players will always lead you to the ball. So that was a pivotal moment for me that I remember quite clearly.
I think you're right. It's a common theme that you can learn a lot tagging. You can learn a lot watching the best, and the best way to do that's obviously close up. 2003, as you touched on, was your draft year. So you've gone from East Fremantle, make the jump to Fremantle via father-son. The father-son's a rule that is often spoken about, and it's changed over the years, and there's the fairly complex bidding process and stuff like that now. But I think it's fairly unanimous that people really love this rule. A little bit different for you in that Brian obviously didn't play for Fremantle as such. You were under the rule where they had access to guys who had played 150 games at a pool of waffle clubs. So a little bit different in your case, but where do you sort of stand on the rule and the romanticism of it all? And were you a fan of the rule and happy to land at Fremantle?
It's sort of a funny one, because obviously I'm stoked for the rule, because it gave me an opportunity to stay home and play at the highest level. I actually would have loved to go on to Geelong. I think that's just because I was born there. Dad played for Geelong. Gary Ablett Senior was my favourite player growing up. He used to have the number 5 on the back, kicking out the front of Scribbly Gum Square where we used to live. And sort of, I think that was the romance that, I wanted to play for a team that Dad played for. I'd done it with East Fremantle. I would have loved to go to Geelong. Father-son, I think, was 100 for VFL. I think Dad might have played 72 or 3 games off memory. So, but once it became reality that Dad was speaking to Fremantle, it sort of made it a little bit more sort of, well, this is reality. I'm potentially going to get picked up and be on a list, which is only the start of the journey. Just getting on a list is one thing, but then to go on and play 1 game, 10 games, 100 games, and so on is where the challenge really lies.
What was Fremantle like to walk into in that sort of era? It was probably a club that was really making moves in the competition for the first time. End of 2003 was its first final, and you were involved in its first real finals run a couple of years later, but was very much just a team still getting off the ground at that stage.
Yeah, there was some really good players that had gone elsewhere and come back. I still remember I was lucky enough. I got a pass from the AFL that I could go. They pretty much said, "Yep, we're going to take Brett Peake, father son, rah rah rah," and I got to train. By memory, it was 6 weeks out from the first final. I got to train with them I'm pretty sure it was Wednesday night. So I'd finish work as an apprentice plumber, as a 4th-year apprentice plumber. I would jump in the old banged up Hilux, and I'd drive down to Fremantle Oval, and I was always late. And they were already training. So I'd put my kit on, run out there. I hadn't even been drafted yet. I'm almost thinking about it now on the spot. It was a little bit surreal. But the one moment that stood out was it was the Wednesday of the first final. I think it was Friday night against Essendon, by memory. And I rocked up late. There was like 10,000 people at Fremantle Oval, all getting ready for what is Fremantle's biggest game. And here Brett Peake rocks up in my short shorts and my blue plumbing top, and then put on my Freo gear and run out there. And I just remember all the Fremantle boys were doing their warm up in a circle, and I just get this glad you could make it, on the biggest game that they're about to play. A player that's not even on their list rocks up that late, and it was just, I remember it like it was yesterday. And it was great to be a part of. Because it did give me that little bit of a taste before I actually went in and started pre-season in late that October.
Of the 10,000 at Freo Oval, how many do you reckon knew who you were on that night?
Probably duck eggs, 0.
What sort of an experience was it? Obviously bizarre and surreal, as you mentioned, but building relationships and that sort of thing. You obviously were entrenched in the group enough to have that little bit of lighthearted banter and whatnot. How did that help once you did show up for real?
Yeah, it made it. I'm pretty easygoing. I can get along with anyone, and the biggest thing was when I did go to day one with all the draftees, I'd already met the squad, the playing list. So it was I have to admit, it was easy because I knew them. It wasn't like I was working into a new employment and I had no idea. I didn't know anyone. It did make it easier. Plus I was 20, so I was a little bit older. I was a little bit older than, most of the draftees of that year, which one was David Mundy. Those guys, most of the draft year that year was 17, 18. So I already had a couple of years on them, but obviously getting to train with them that once a week leading up to that draft, certainly made it easier.
What's the journey then like from the end of 2003 until, midway through 2005 when you make your debut? It's probably a slightly uncertain time. Does the club sort of walk you through that period? Because you would have been itching to make your debut and it did take a little while, whereas other guys like David and others, I assume, would have made slightly earlier debuts. What's that period like at a footy club?
Yeah, as I said just before, getting drafted, it's probably the easiest thing.
Yeah.
And then obviously going through training, getting your body, you're going from being a full-time apprentice to a full-time athlete, running sessions, weights. I had no idea what a weight was. Intense running sessions, skills sessions, food that's going in your body, learning about hydration, yoga, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was a bit of a shock to the system. And I was still pretty small then. And I still didn't know where I was going to play. Like, where was my best position? I didn't really have an idea. So the first sort of year, you sort of go, through it. But I broke my arm in a derby, with about literally, I remember Stephen Dodd kicked a ball over my head and I ran back and just got absolutely shit mixed and broke my arm, which sort of put me back a little bit. But that was probably, looking back on it, it was probably a good thing because you could then sort of sit back, get your rehab done, and then come back and make a tilt for it. So yeah, it is an uncertain time, but at the end of the day, the old man always says, if you're good enough, it will come, it will happen. If you work hard, you listen, you ask questions, everything will happen. So yeah, it felt like it was probably a long time, but it went really quick, and I still remember my debut like it was yesterday.
So round 13, 2005 against North. Tell us about that occasion and what the build-up was like. When did you find out you were debuting?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure of memory. The week before, I think we played Sydney, and that was going to be my debut. But a really close person in the family passed away, and then they didn't want to tell me when I was over in Sydney, and then next minute I got to make my debut against North, which I found out on the Tuesday. So plenty of time, sort of to get ready. And I knew I was close, but just sometimes when you're that close, you're that far away. So I got time to let it sort of sink in, and yeah, it was very enjoyable. First person to give me my first kick was Stephen Dodd, so someone that I've played a lot of junior footy against and with. And my first opponent who ran past was Glenn Archer. Wow. And I still remember I started on the wing and looking around Subiaco Oval going, how good's this? Decent crowd in, and Glenn Archer sort of runs up to me and I'm like, oh, this is a little bit real. He's going to absolutely flatten me. And I just remember he goes, big fan of you, old man. Good luck for today. Wow. I'll see you during the game. And that's what he said. So incredible. That sort of shows you the type of bloke, intimidating force on the field. But yeah, I remember that once again, like it was yesterday. Because, you used to watch up North Melbourne of the 90s, every Friday night, every kid watched Friday night footy. And North Melbourne were the biggest team in AFL. So, to get to go out there and sort of play against some of the legends that I watched that I never thought I'd ever play against, it was a nice thing.
You played 9 out of the next 10 games. Did you start to feel settled in that last couple of months of the season?
Yeah, certainly. I started to find my feet. The team sort of won a few games and there was a chance to make finals. I think we played Port Adelaide the last round, and we had to win to make the finals. And it was a big game. It was a night game over there, and it was probably one of my better games for that 9-block period. And we fell short. Obviously, Port back then were a very good team, and it just gave me sort of a sniff to go into the 2006 season, ready to rock and roll. Have a good pre-season and see if I could play at the highest level and play well.
20 games in 2006, and then this is where Freo sort of really started to make the move. So a lot of those guys, I think, Sandilands, Mundy, Johnson, McFarlane really started to make moves in that season, and a slightly more experienced Matthew Pavlich now, and you end up in a preliminary final. You've obviously established yourself in that side, and then a finals run. What's finals football like, first of all? And you must have felt like you were really a part of something early in your career, but also essentially early in the life of the Dockers as well.
Yeah, that period, I think we went on and won. My memory and stats aren't the greatest, but I think we went on a run of 10 straight wins or 9 straight wins. And I can tell you, when everything's going well in AFL, the weeks just rolled by. It was just, we all trained hard, we all played hard, and things just rolled on. We just were in sync with it, with everything in the footy club, whether it was from, the hierarchy down to the playing group, down to the younger kids who are, trying to push their way in. Everything just rolled through. It felt easy, and it does. When you're winning and you're winning consistently, it does. Winning breeds winning. And it was a really enjoyable sort of period that time. And then heading into finals, I started to get tagged a little bit. So that was a whole nother level of pressure that I had to sort of withstand. And I had to speak to some of the on-ballers. I had to speak to the old man just to get some advice of how to deal with a tag. But yeah, to play in a final series and a big final series, to get a double chance as well, It was amazing. We look back on it now. I said this to another interview that I did a while back. It was funny how footy works, because we had the edge over the Eagles in that year, and we had to go over to Adelaide. We should have beaten Adelaide in Adelaide. But then again, I think West Coast were playing Sydney, which West Coast Sydney back in that, the mid-2000s. Those games were unbelievable. And we were on the plane back. We played Friday night. We're on the plane back Saturday, and the Eagles were playing Sydney, and we were barracking for the Eagles to win, because we wanted them to get the week off. We played Melbourne the following week, and then means we would have played Eagles at home for a prelim, which would have been huge. But instead, the Eagles lost. So Sydney obviously went through to the prelim. We had to beat Melbourne in Perth, and then go over and ultimately play Sydney at ANZ Stadium, which was it's a different ground, very hostile. And Sydney were, they were up and about in 2005, 2006. So yeah, it's amazing. The swings and roundabouts of, the ball bounces this way or that way, and we could have been totally different back then, but it wasn't. So you sort of live and let go.
Did you allow yourself to sort of dream in the month of September that year? I'm sure it would have all been kept under wraps as far as the top dogs at the club go, but as a younger player, did you let yourself think ahead a little bit to the MCG the following week and what might lie ahead for you?
Oh, of course. It's just natural. It's how quick you can block that out.
Yeah.
Every footy fan wants to be at the G on, that last Saturday in September. Every player wants to be at the G in that last Saturday in September and experience it. Every little kid, imagine, I speak to young kids now, and they're like, oh, what is it like? What's it like? They all want to be there and experience it, whether it is as a player, supporter, or, lover of the game. And you do drift away for moments and go, oh, imagine that 100,000 people roar. Imagine if we got to stand on that Dallas at the end of the game with a medal. Oh, you do. I don't care what anyone says. Everyone has to dream, and you've got to visualize that. You have to visualize it. But what then happens is, how quick can you snap out of it and get back to what needs to be done? And that's getting back on the training track and visualizing on the job ahead. So, yeah, it was a really exciting time. But at the end of the day, we weren't good enough, and it would have been huge, for Fremantle, because it didn't come until, I don't know, you're probably better stats man than me, 2015, until they got that chance really to get that first trophy in the cabinet.
I want to touch on what you mentioned before with the tagging. You've gone from all you learnt tagging in the waffle to being tagged yourself, but I imagine you would have been tagged as an outside player, which isn't something we see a lot of, but can be pretty damaging. What sort of advice did you get from your dad and the others that you turned to, and how did you work through that period?
Yeah, it is a little bit rare, because obviously my speed and my endurance was a key, and yeah, I was an outside player. That was sort of where I played. Every now and then I'd go on ball and be in the nitty gritty of it, but I wasn't a bull. We call the midfielders bulls, who can really sort of push off their opponent and sort of, the clearance kings. Cripps Hayes, in Cripps more now, but Lenny Hayes was an absolute gun as a bull. And yeah, it was just, they would try to stop my run and never let me get goal side and always make body contact. And you just got to work through that. You've got to get your running patterns. For me, I'll run the length of the ground, numerous amounts of times, going back and forth. And it was your running patterns, you had to get them right. You had to time it. And you're sort of also relying on, getting a clearance as well. So then, when you're running or you're handballing, receiving, you're not, getting checked. So it was working through it. It was working through it and sort of making sure that, my endurance and my stamina and my speed would get me through it. But still, it doesn't stop you. Every minute of the day, you got someone banging into you, trying to stop your run. You get over it pretty quickly. But obviously, footy goes for 120 minutes, and you got to grit your teeth and just go, because if you sort of spit the chewy, it'll be a long 120 minutes, and it'll be hard.
Is it something that you've had to deal with as well, returning to eventually to East Fremantle and then to country footy? Do you still cop it every now and then down south?
Yeah, it's one of those things. More so nowadays, I play full forward, so I play in the sort of cage and occasionally sort of run up the ground and run back. I suppose opposition teams see me as, as a threat. I'm 40 next year, so I'm still running around, enjoying it, and kicking the odd snag here and there. So yeah, obviously the opposition are going to put time into me. A lot of games, I get a young fella come and stand next to me. So sometimes I'll sort of help them a little bit. I won't help them in regards to how to stop me, but I'll just help them a little bit in regards to the game itself. And yeah, it's enjoyable. Am I still good enough to play at this level? I still enjoy it, and obviously, you'll want to give back a little bit. So for me, giving back, playing sort of country footy now, is giving back to the next generation. And I've played with some really good young kids, whether it be in the South West League or the Great Southern, which I'm playing in now. If I can just give a little bit back, if it makes them a better footy player, a better person, if it's only something very small, well, I've done my job. But yeah, once again, still enjoy the the toughness of the game, and working through it. And at my age, it doesn't get any easier. In fact, it probably gets harder.
Man, I think the 70-odd goals you kicked this year is probably an indication there's still a spot for you in that Shark side. Back on the AFL
yeah,
side.
but if you rest on...
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, if you rest on your laurels, though, that's when it catches up to you.
End of 2009, so it was 6 years all up at Fremantle, and end of 2009, the move arises to St Kilda. Was that something that you'd been interested in? Was it a conversation or a dialogue that the Dockers started? How did that come about?
Yeah, I still remember that year. Obviously, you'd come off sort of a couple of lean years. Fremantle weren't doing that well, and sort of you can get, being in Perth, sort of probably needed to get out of there and see if I could still play at the highest level, potentially for another club. So obviously you speak to your manager, and there was a couple of clubs sort of interested, and the first club that I had a meeting with was St Kilda, and it was sort of the middle of that year, the 2009 year. They came over to Perth, and we had a meeting, and sort of was pretty much, if everything could work out, St Kilda was going to be the destination. At that stage, I didn't know they were going to go on to play in the 2009 grand final and fall agonisingly short. So in my head, I pretty much checked out, knowing that a fresh start was probably what I needed.
What was it that attracted you to St Kilda? They were obviously a strong club. Like you say, you didn't know that they were going to come quite so close that particular year, but they were a strong club at the time. Ross Lyon was there. Players you mentioned, Lenny Hayes already, Nick Riewoldt, some serious footballers getting around. Is that part of the lure?
Well, it's a funny one because it's a risk. It's not like I'd come off a dominant season to sort of... It's a little bit easier now. They have free agency and all that, and I think free agency is great. I think they can still do some work around it, and have switches at the halfway stage, etc., and really make AFL like the NFL and the NBA and the Premier League and all that. But it was a risk for me wanting to leave Fremantle, because who knows who would have taken a chance on me? Like, my career could have been done. Fremantle. Can't remember. I was out of contract. They might have given me a year. So that's where your manager comes into it. He'll sound out a few clubs and see who's interested. And it was St Kilda, Melbourne a little bit, and Sydney. I had a couple of meetings with Sydney. Sydney also attracted just because of their culture, that you sort of see and hear from an external point of view. And they had some good people that I had meetings with, but it was St Kilda that, when I spoke to them, I actually spoke to Lenny Hayes and Nick Riewoldt 2 days on the Monday after the 2009 grand final. So if everyone, thinks, Mad Monday, et cetera, they have just come off losing a grand final, yet they sat down and had a coffee with me on a Monday morning to speak to me, to see if I was a player that could help them or would fit in with sort of their culture and structure. And that just shows the type of people that they are as individuals, but where the club was at, where St Kilda was at. And once I'd had a meeting with them, the Tuesday was with Ross, and I was sold. I said, I'll do anything. If you want to take a chance on me, let's try to get a deal done, and I'll come over and let's go from there. So yeah, obviously fortunate enough to go to Melbourne and play with St Kilda.
Yeah, it shows an incredible drive and a really good indicator of where the club's at and why they were obviously not successful in the ultimate regard, but a very, very good club at the time. Is that incredible drive to be looking immediately at how they can improve their squad. And then obviously you walk in the door and Ross Lyon, who was, as far as coaching goes, we sort of know him certainly from the outside as this pretty tough and rough operator, but was extremely good at what he does and what he did and what he's doing again, and was at the top of his game at that period. What was a Ross Lyon coached program like to be involved with?
I've said it before, and I find it really staggering. Right? Yes, he hasn't won a grand final. Right, and every media, every footy lover makes it very clear. Right. He's taken to St Kilda to 3, obviously the 09, the 10 and the draw, and then obviously taking to Fremantle. So he's doing something right. He can get a team to a grand final. At the end of the day, it's the team that is going to win or lose on the day. He can only do everything in his power. So he's the greatest coach I've ever had. His footy knowledge is second to none, just the way that he goes about it. Being coached by him for 2 years, he was just honest. He would say it how it was. And this is how I've been brought up. It is straight down the line. Yep, you're good enough. No, you're not. This is what you need to work on, right? He wasn't there to be your best mate. And I've seen players, I suppose I wouldn't say get on the wrong side of him, but he sort of makes it. He goes, hard path or the easy path. Let's go. Let's get to work. We need to get to work to get there. I just loved everything about him, how he coached, his sense of humour. I really love having, said it earlier in the podcast, love having debates with people that don't know him, people that have no idea how he operates, what makes him tick. Once again, people can have their say, and that's healthy. Keyboard warriors, they can say what they want, but a lot of people that have comments about people in that sort of, that high sporting environment, a lot of them, unfortunately, are uneducated, and they just say it like they're, they should go and be the coach, or, their opinion is what it is and they're right, which I love hearing opinions, because opinions are good. Don't get me wrong, but far out, he copped some criticism. And I think going back to St Kilda, I would back him in to make the finals next year. It's their 150th year. Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but he's the best. He's the best coach by far. And you can probably tell I just laugh because a lot of people do mock him, but it's not like he's coached for 10 years and hasn't taken a. There's other coaches out there that haven't been close to finals that are coached for a long period of time. Yeah. And yeah, he is hard but fair, and that's why I've got a lot of time for him. I always stick up for him. He'll do well back at St Kilda. I think he in the press conference he said there's something missing and he's got unfinished business. So I wish him all the best as an individual, but also obviously St Kilda as well.
Do you still have a relationship with Ross, and what was your initial reaction when you found out he was going back?
I haven't spoken to Ross for a while now. I'm pretty sure if I walked past him or I rang him, he would be the first to pick up the phone and have a conversation. I had a good relationship with him. He got the best out of me as a person and as a player. And I loved playing for him. You sort of were always on, walking around on eggshells. You'd think you'd had a pretty good game, and you certainly wouldn't walk into the club on a Monday sort of, walking around like, yeah, I've had a pretty good game, because he'll just squash you straight back down. He keeps you on edge, and gives you the tools to get better. If you give him time, he'll give you time. If you put in the hard work, and I have seen guys, both at St Kilda and Fremantle, get their careers cut because they might have not jumped on the same pages as Ross. But at the end of the day, he's the coach, and what he says goes. And if you don't sort of buy into it, you will get left behind. And I have seen it. And playing AFL is it's a cutthroat game. It's a cutthroat industry. It's business. It's probably gone too much on the business side than the game. But at the end of the day,
The 2010 grand final, so it must have been just a wild ride in your first year at the club, and here you are in a team that you knew was pretty good at the time, but they're in another grand final and you're in your first. And then guys and your teammates and Collingwood players have described just the empty feeling at the end of this drawn grand final. Where were you on the ground? How did that feel? What was the emotion? Because you hear so many guys just say didn't know what to think or how to feel.
Yeah, the siren went, and it was a sort of a stoppage just outside, probably 70 metres out on broadcast side, and I was right there. And there's a photo, we've all got our hands on our heads. We sort of knew, it was sort of weird because you don't talk about playing in a draw and then what happens.
Yeah.
I still remember Nick Maxwell and Lenny Hayes goes, far out, like, do we play extra time or do we come back next week? Like, the consensus was we come back next week and play, but there was still an element of doubt. When that siren went, you could have heard a pin drop. It was like there was such an empty feeling, not knowing what was really happening. And then even when the hierarchy of the AFL came out, there was still some sort of pandemonium in regards to what was actually happening and what will happen. Looking back on it, you never go to a grand final or, you see it in NBA, that best of seven. So there's no draw. They have overtime and all that.
Yeah.
You don't go to a grand final, as a player, as a supporter, as a lover of the game, to then the siren goes and it's like, oh, we've got to come back next week and do it all again. You got to be gracious in defeat and gracious in victory. And that was, looking back on it, that was the most disappointing thing. Not because it was a draw and we came back next week and got smashed. It was just because someone should have left there being a winner. Someone should have left there being, unfortunately, a loser. And that's why they've brought in the rule that there will be extra time if there is another draw. I think it's only two or three times in history of the AFL that it happened. And I was lucky enough or unfortunate enough to be involved in it. It was the most bizarre feeling. Even the next week, the lead up into the replay was just weird.
I'm fascinated by that next week because you have that, you're sort of like peaking towards your grand final all season, and then you get to that sort of emotional high, and then you've got to go again, and you're expecting to be either celebrating a premiership or at Mad Monday or building towards next year, and suddenly you're building towards a grand final again. What did that week look like for you guys? Was it managed differently? How did Ross go about sort of tempering where it was all at?
Yeah, so, Saturday after the grand final, usually you go back with all your supporters to somewhere and either celebrate or sort of sit back and reflect on what would have been. So we, as a playing group, cancelled that. I'm pretty sure Collingwood went on and sort of went there with some of their supporters and because they had a function room booked out, rah. And then it obviously was recovery on the Sunday, and then Monday it was like a normal week. It was just like the following week. The only thing that was different was you didn't do the grand final parade again.
Yeah.
But we didn't really look at the game too much from the draw because there was no point. It's a whole nother game. And I firmly believe it was always going to be either one team or the other that was going to come out and win sort of quite convincingly, which at the end of the day, it was Collingwood. You know, they were too good. They settled quicker. They made the most out of their scoring opportunities, and sort of we were a little bit slow and sort of missed some crucial goals. And yeah, unfortunately, it's never nice to lose a game, let alone a grand final. But if there's one thing that I sort of took out from it, it certainly taught me a lot about life and in sport, and you know, winning, losing, everything in between about that. But it's still, don't get me wrong, every time September comes, it still hurts. It's still got a little bit of a, you know, sinking feeling, just because so close yet so far away.
What do you remember of Ross's exit at St Kilda?
Well, I said it in a podcast before. Was I lucky enough or unlucky enough to hear our conversation? I knew he was exiting. St Kilda, I think, didn't want to give him long-term deal, you know, which, looking back on it as a player, I don't know all the ins and outs. Like, we're not privy to that. We don't need to know that. That's for the board and the management to sort out. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he wanted a long-term deal. They wouldn't give it to him. So obviously there was some key people at Fremantle that sort of found out and were having conversations, and it did. I obviously knew that he was going there. I just kept it to myself because it's got nothing to do with anyone else. Looking back on it, I probably should have tried harder to try to get back to Fremantle because he got the best out of me. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. I only ended up playing one more AFL game, and then my career was sort of done. Got sacked. Pretty much, you know, don't call it delisted, you call it sacked, which sits fine with me. There's nothing wrong with being sacked. Yeah. And he went on and did what he did at Fremantle and nearly got Fremantle and his first flag. So it's one of those things.
Is that genuine? Was there a desire, or at least a thought towards getting back to Fremantle at that time? Is it something that you sort of flirted with?
Oh, it was just internal. It was just internal. I spoke to the old man about it. But coming off, St Kilda had played in the 09, the 10 grand finals. Like, we still had the same list. Like, there was, like, I'd just come off probably my best year in 11. Like, why would you want to go back home? Like, you know, I was loving Melbourne. It's one of those things. I didn't exercise the idea as much as I sit back now and go, I probably should have. But then again, just because I wanted to follow him back, that doesn't mean he might have said no. You know, Fremantle hierarchy might have said no. But, you know, speaking to you now, geez, it would have been nice. But I was happy to stay at St Kilda. St Kilda gave me another opportunity, and I genuinely thought we could have still, you know, with a new coach, could have still done something to make the finals and been a threat. But that wasn't to be so.
So you did come back to Perth once your time ended at the Saints, and a good run at East Fremantle, which must have been really special as an older player to come back and give back. But being bush footy legends, I want to touch on your time in the country. So a game on permit in 2017 at Bunbury. How much convincing from there did Jamie Narney have to do to get you to sign up full time?
So the wife's so the parents, so the in-laws, they got a farm in Boyna, and we spent a fair bit of time, which Boyna is smack bang between, if anyone doesn't know, Bunbury and Donnybrook. We were actually at the, I think they call it the Donnybrook Apple Fair or something. We were down there for a weekend, and I'd finished the week before with East Fremantle, and I seen Lukey Toyer. Lukey Toyer lives down in Bunbury, and he goes, "Oh, what are you doing down here?" And he misheard. He thought I said I was living down there. Lukey Toyer is good friends with Jamie Narney. I get a call from Jamie Narney going, "Oh, I hear you're living down here." I said, No, just, you know, in-laws have got a property, rah, 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 rah. And he goes, "Oh, do you want to come and, you know, maybe play for the Bulldogs?" Long story short is I met Jamie Narney back in 2012 maybe. I met him, didn't know him, met him and his family, and he sort of helped me out in a funny way. And I just thought that I owed it to him to go and play a year with the Bulldogs, who were an up-and-coming team. And fast forward to the end of the year, we win a flag.
So that 2017 grand final, I've heard you say before that it's right up there in your footy career. You obviously missed out at St Kilda and in that sort of brief finals run with Freo, but you get it done at the Dogs in your first season in the country. I remember that game as well. It was a wet slog against Harvey Bruns, and there was a bit of feeling in it. What was that day like?
It was good. Bunbury Bulldogs were a rebuilding club. I think I was the only travelling player, even though we were living sort of down the farm, sort of 3-4 nights a week anyway. You used to try to get to the Friday training session. It was just a good young group of guys that wanted to play footy, well coached, and it was just really enjoyable. But we sort of were probably the underdogs going in. I think we won the prelim against Margaret River by 3 points, and HBL, Harvey Brunswick, were the better team all year. I still remember before the warm up, we all got there sort of 2 hours before the game. All speaking, there was rumours that they had dropped the skipper, Spud Newman, and once we found out that they did, I just said to the boys, "Mate, game over. It's ours to lose now." And we just all rallied around each other. There was no nerves. It was just like, we expected ourselves to win, but when we heard that, I knew it was game over. I knew that we just had to stick to our process, and it was a wet day, just a slog. I think we ended up winning by 40-odd points, but it felt like the game was done in the first quarter. And, it does sort of sit very close to me because a grand final is a grand final, no matter what level or what grade you're playing. And it was the first one in Bunbury for a long time with a young group, and it was just enjoyable. And obviously I'm a premiership player for the Bulldogs, and that'll always be.
I was a young sort of student journalist sniffing around my hometown Bunbury at the time, and I remember Newman being dropped and it just being this massive footy story in Southwest circles. And then a couple of the guys that you played with on that day have gone on to bigger things as well. I think Aidan Clark took one of the better marks I've ever seen on that day in the wet, Harry Creasy and another couple of guys as well. Do you still have relationships with that Bunbury group that you won that flag with? You're obviously there for another couple of years after that. Is there still that bond?
Yeah, there is, and obviously you grow on, you go on and do other things and all that. But there's still a couple of the boys that you still flick a text to, and speak to Narns every now and then because I played in the premiership. He's the coach. Gave me an opportunity to go to Bunbury and win a premiership. So I think it was our 5 years ago this year. So I'm looking forward to the 10-year reunion. And celebrating, and because a lot of those guys that won that flag in 17 were like 17, 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
So they'll still be playing potentially at the 10-year reunion. So, just a very, very proud moment, but just really enjoyable to do it with a ripping bunch of lads.
And then I guess the next big leg of your country footy journey is where you are now in the Albany Sharks. So this is a club that I believe it's 2 wins in 12 years, the first 12 years of their existence before you arrived, and there were some changes at the club. What sort of a place was it to walk into, and how much work did it take to take them to a maiden finals appearance last year and a grand final appearance this year?
Yeah, how good going to a club as a 38, 39-year-old that's won 2 games in 12 years. Everyone was like, what are you doing? I suppose for me, I still thought, and I knew the body was in sort of good nick that I could give back to a club that, on paper was struggling from a wins and losses point of view. But in regards to where I could see the future going with the Sharks, I was all in. I was all in, and, I was going to drive down from Perth and play every week, and, stranger things have happened, but I find myself living, down here with a few opportunities that sort of pop up, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And it was hard work, but the structure that they've got from a management point of view, the coach in Jamie Ram, it was destined to have success. It probably came, and when I say success technically always isn't defined by a medal or a trophy. So I knew that, probably came a little bit quicker in that first year to play finals. I think we won 8 games, and then, everyone had a taste of it. It was a big thing for the club, and roll into this year, and everything started to click. We won more games. Yeah, we got a few players in. Some young guys stepped up, but yeah, to play in a grand final for a team that 2 years ago, just was getting some of the losses were like 200 points. To be a part of that, but at the end of the day, we didn't win on grand final day. So once again, we've got to pull our socks up, get back to work, and come back. I've committed to go again next year, just so I can celebrate my 40th birthday playing footy. And yeah, hopefully it's certainly not going to be easy, because once, we're the hunted now. Once other teams would just roll up and just go, oh, we're playing the Sharks, this is going to be 4 points, percentage boost, happy days, let's roll on, let's move forward. Whereas now we should be sort of a force to be reckoned with. And if the young group and everyone involved knows that we've got a lot of hard work to do, yeah, hopefully next year, I believe we're good enough that we can go the whole way and get the maiden grand final victory and hold that trophy up. But it's been such an enjoyable time down here. Once again, young group, some really good footy players, not just in our team, in the competition down here. The Great Southern is a really strong competition for 6 teams. And yeah, once again, I'm just giving a little bit back and see if we can get that ultimate prize.
Brett Peake, has been an amazing footy journey for yourself, an amazing footy family, and the drive to continue at country level has been admirable. And Albany Sharks are one of the great footy stories, I think, and I think everyone should get around them next year. You are the hunted, which will be a little bit different, but I think we are all barracking for you to get over the line next year, and it'll be another really interesting season. Thank you very much for joining us on the final episode of the Bush Footy Legends podcast. It's been amazing. We appreciate you sharing all these stories, and very appreciative.
Muchly appreciated for having me on, and all the best, and thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bush Footy Legends. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you like, follow, and share it with your mates. Make sure you check in on them while you're there. For tips and advice on how to look after yourself, your family, and your mates, visit thinkmentalhealthwa.com.au. Get in touch with us through our Instagram page at WA Country Football, or if you want to suggest a guest, email us at wafc.com.au. If you're after more, stay tuned. We'll have an episode dropping every week.